What if I told you some of the craziest mansions in Black church culture were not owned by rappers, not owned by athletes, not owned by movie stars, but by pastors? Not regular church housing, not a nice little upgrade in the suburbs. I'm talking about waterfront estates, huge gated properties, luxury cars, private jet headlines, massive acreage, and houses so big they instantly make people ask the same question. How does a preacher live like this? That's why these homes hit so hard. Because the second a pastor's house starts looking like a mogul's estate, the conversation changes. Now people are not just thinking about ministry. Now they're thinking about money, power, influence, image. And the one question that always makes people uncomfortable: how rich is too rich for a man of God? Let's get into it. Point 1. These mansions go viral for one simple reason. They break the picture people already had in their minds. Most people grow up with a certain image of a pastor. Respected, stable, maybe well off, but still familiar, still grounded, still close enough to ordinary life that the role makes sense. So when a preacher's house starts looking like something from a luxury real estate tour, it creates instant tension. That's the first reason these stories spread so fast. Because a mansion does not just say someone is successful. It says someone is operating at an entirely different level. And once that level gets attached to a pastor, people stop seeing only a spiritual leader. They start seeing a brand, a machine, an institution, sometimes even an empire. That's why the house matters. It stops feeling like just a private residence. It starts feeling like a statement. And if you want one of the clearest examples of that, you have to start with T.D. Jakes. Point 2. T.D. Jakes's White Rock estate looked less like church housing and more like executive luxury. Bishop T.D. Jakes's former White Rock Lake property in Dallas is one of those homes that immediately changes the temperature of the conversation. Advocate magazine reported that the estate measured 10,681 square feet and included 5 bedrooms, 6 full baths, 2 half baths, a game room, sauna, gym, pool, koi pond, and a 4-car garage. It was listed in 2019 for $5.75 million. Zillow's property record also reflects the 10,681 square foot size and a later sale in 2020. That is not ordinary comfort. That is full-scale luxury. And that's why the image sticks. When people hear the word bishop, they may imagine robes, books, conferences, and church offices. They do not automatically imagine a waterfront estate with resort-style features. That's the memorable part. The house looked less like clergy life and more like the kind of place you would expect from a top executive who had already won. And the deeper insight is this. Once a pastor builds a platform big enough, the house starts acting like visible proof of scale. It tells people the ministry is large, the audience is large, and the money orbiting that platform is large too. But with Jakes, one beautiful house was not the whole story. And that is what made the luxury feel even louder. Point 3. When luxury shows up more than once, people stop calling it success and start calling it lifestyle. One expensive house can always be explained away. Maybe it was timing. Maybe it was a smart buy. Maybe it was a rare opportunity. But when high-level living keeps appearing around the same person, the explanation changes. Now, it starts looking intentional. Reporting about Jakes's later Fort Worth residence described another major luxury property at roughly 14,000 square feet, with features like vaulted ceilings, fireplaces, marble and stone finishes, a guest house, sports court, pool, and spa. And that changes the emotional effect. Because now the public is not looking at one special house. They are looking at a pattern. And patterns are what turn curiosity into fascination. That's why this lands so hard with Jakes. His public image has never been confined to one pulpit. It expanded into books, conferences, film, leadership events, television, and a nationally recognized megachurch platform. So the luxury does not feel random. It feels matched to the size of the machine around him. And once a pastor's home starts matching the scale of his public platform, the mansion no longer feels like background. It becomes part of the brand. But if Jakes gives polished executive energy, Creflo Dollar takes the conversation somewhere even bigger. Point 4. Creflo Dollar's estate is the kind of property people do not describe as a house. They describe it like a kingdom. When people talk about pastor mansions that feel almost unreal, Creflo Dollar's Fayetteville property comes up fast. Multiple property-style reports describe it as roughly 17,000 square feet on around 182.9 acres. And that scale hits differently, because once you move past big house and into massive estate sitting on huge private land, the feeling changes. Now people are not picturing comfort. They are picturing distance, gates, silence, space, control. That's what makes a property like this feel so heavy. A mansion says luxury, but acreage says power. That is the detail that multiplies the effect. A rich person living in a beautiful house is one thing. A rich person living in a huge house wrapped in that much land feels different. It feels insulated, untouchable. Like the person is no longer simply wealthy, but fully separated from ordinary life. And that is exactly why estates like this get remembered. But with Creflo Dollar, the property was never just about the property. It hit harder because of what people already associated him with. Point 5. In Creflo Dollar's case, the mansion felt like the visual version of the message. This is where the story becomes even more intense. Creflo Dollar's public image has long been tied to prosperity preaching. So when people see a giant estate attached to a figure like that, they do not read it as random. They read it as connected. And that changes everything. To supporters, the house can look like evidence that the message worked. To critics, the exact same house can look like the reason the message feels suspect. That tension is why the mansion becomes so powerful. It stops being just real estate. It becomes an argument you can see. It becomes the physical version of a bigger question. What is blessing supposed to look like when it becomes visible? That is the mini insight here. The more public the pastor's message is, the more symbolic the mansion becomes. The house turns into a mirror for the theology. And once that happens, people are no longer talking only about a home. They are debating an entire worldview. And if you want to see that tension explode all the way into public controversy, Eddie Long is impossible to leave out. Point 6. Eddie Long's mansion-era image looked like mega-church power, pushed right to the edge of public comfort. WSB-TV reported in 2012 that Eddie Long lived in a $1 million home in DeKalb County, drove a Bentley, and had owned Gulfstream jets. The same reporting said New Birth had once grown into a church worth nearly $100 million. That is an enormous public image. And that is exactly why Eddie Long still comes up in conversations like this. Because his lifestyle did not just look comfortable, it looked amplified. A mansion, luxury cars, jets, a massive church footprint, national exposure, political attention. Put all of that together, and it starts feeling less like traditional church leadership and more like a full-scale power structure. That is what made his case unforgettable. Yes, the house mattered. But what really made the image explosive was everything surrounding it. The church looked huge. The lifestyle looked huge. The visibility looked huge. And once that kind of scale wraps itself around a pastor, public fascination becomes automatic. That is the deeper insight here. People are not shocked because luxury exists. They are shocked because luxury is showing up inside a role that many still expect to look spiritually restrained. That clash is what gives the whole story its power. And that takes us to the final point. Point 7. In the end, these mansions are not really about square footage, they are about status. At a certain point, nobody is even arguing about bedrooms anymore. The real argument is what the house communicates. A pastor's mansion says something whether people like it or not. It says, I built something huge. I have reach. I move at a serious level. I am visible. I am powerful. I am not small. That is why these homes keep returning to public conversation. Because in Black church culture, the pastor has often been more than a preacher. He can be a speaker, builder, organizer, public face, political voice, businessman, or symbol of possibility. So when the home starts looking like a mogul's estate, people read it as a status signal. Some admire it, some distrust it. A lot of people do both at the same time. And that is the final insight. These mansion stories never really stay about the mansions. They stay alive because they force one massive question that never goes away. What happens when spiritual authority starts dressing itself in the visual language of extreme wealth? That is why T.D. Jakes' waterfront estate, Creflo Dollar's massive Fayetteville property, and Eddie Long's mansion-era image still land so hard years later. So yes, when people say some black pastors' mansions are on another level, they are not just being dramatic. These were not ordinary success stories with a nice house attached. They were full public images of power. T.D. Jakes gave people executive luxury ministry. Creflo Dollar gave people estate-level prosperity symbolism. Eddie Long gave people mega-church wealth pushed right to the edge of public comfort. And that is why these homes still fascinate people. They sit right where faith and fame collide, where ministry meets money, where blessing turns into branding. That is where the tension lives. And that is why the mansion story never stays just about the mansion. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe for more stories on black wealth, church power, luxury lifestyles, and the figures whose success keeps the whole internet debating. Because this mansion story is wild, but the next pastor, billionaire, or black icon we break down might make this one look modest.